My fiancé brought his mistress to a crucial business negotiation, pretending not to know me. He didn't expect me to walk straight up to the VIP table, speak in 6 different languages, and have the head of the delegation take my hand and announce, "This is my daughter. Her name is Anna Nguyen." That night, I stood outside the grand entrance of the Emerald Cascades Hotel in downtown Seattle, clutching a pale gold-foiled invitation. The biting wind off Puget Sound made my hands so cold they were almost numb. There was no name on the invitation, just 2 short, cold, and insulting words, +1. The sender was the executive assistant to Michael Vance, my fiancé. Or, more accurately, the man who had promised to marry me next month, who had slipped a ring on my finger in my tiny Capitol Hill apartment on a rainy night, whispering that having me by his side was all he needed for the rest of his tinus life. The security guard at the door glanced at the invitation, then at me. His eyes swept over my simple black dress, my non-designer heels, and the small clutch I'd been using for 2 years before settling on the blank guest name line. I knew what that look meant. Someone with no name, no status, and no clear position, stepping into a gala filled with tech moguls, city officials, and investors, people who could decide the fate of a billion-dollar logistics project with a mere handshake. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm with Mr. Michael Vance, CEO of Vance Group." The guard checked the tablet. Seeing Michael's name on the VIP list, he finally stepped aside. I walked into the grand ballroom, instantly engulfed by the sounds of a string quartet, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the heavy scent of expensive perfumes. The chandeliers poured golden light over tailored Tom Ford suits and glittering evening gowns, illuminating smiles so well rehearsed you couldn't tell what was real anymore. I stood by the entrance for a few seconds before I spotted Michael. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, his tall, straight posture and calm demeanor radiant under the lights. In a crowded room, he still stood out, as if born to be looked up to. For the 3 years we dated, I used to be so proud of that. I used to think that a man like him choosing me meant I held a special place in his heart. But tonight, the woman standing beside Michael wasn't me. Clinging to his arm was Victoria Thorne. Victoria was wearing a fitted burgundy gown, her hair swept up in an elegant updo, lips curled in a slight smile. Her eyes crinkled in a way that showed she was entirely used to being admired by men. She was the youngest daughter of the Fady Teen, Thorne real estate dynasty, and Michael's childhood friend. 3 months ago, when she returned to Seattle from New York, Michael had told me, "She's just an old family friend I grew up with. Don't overthink it." I believed him. I always did. Because in love, the most foolish thing isn't being deceived. It's giving someone the permission to deceive you, time and time again. I watched Victoria lean in to whisper something in Michael's ear. He bent down, so close his lips nearly brushed her hair. Then, he reached up to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender, natural, and familiar that it made my chest ache. I stood less than 60 feet away from them, yet I felt like an outsider, a lost guest who had wandered into someone else's story. Just then, the light caught Victoria's hand. I saw the ring on her ring finger, and my heart felt like it was being crushed. It was the exact Tiffany & Co. engagement setting Michael had bought for me. My ring had a modest, 1-carat diamond. He had told me he preferred subtle elegance over flashy displays. I had believed it was just his aesthetic. Yet, on Victoria's finger, the identical setting held a stone 3 times the size, brighter, prouder, like a silent declaration that she was the one meant to stand in the light. I looked down at my bare hands. Before coming here, Michael had texted me, "Don't wear your ring tonight. There are important partners there, and it'll just invite questions. It's too complicated right now. After the wedding, I'll introduce you properly." I had listened to him. I had taken the ring off, placed it in my vanity drawer, and carefully smoothed out the faint indentation it left on my finger. Now, looking back, I felt so pathetically naive it was almost funny. He didn't tell me to hide the ring because he was afraid people would ask who I was. He was afraid I would ruin his perfect performance as a powerful, eligible bachelor, escorting the Thorne family heiress. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, avoiding alcohol so I wouldn't lose my composure. I chose a small, secluded table in the corner where no one would notice me. From there, I had a clear view of Michael and Victoria. He pulled out her chair, served her hors d'oeuvres, leaned in to listen to her speak, and occasionally smiled. It was the smile I thought belonged only to me. On quiet nights in my apartment, when I would make a warm beef stew, and he would sit at the kitchen island, exhausted but smiling, saying, "Anna, when I'm home with you, my life finally feels peaceful." My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "I have an important networking event tonight. Probably going to be late. Eat without me, don't wait up." I stared at the text, then looked up at the man sitting a few tables away, placing a piece of seared scallop onto Victoria's plate. In that fraction of a second, I stopped feeling the pain. I only felt cold. A chill that didn't come from the hotel's AC, but from a truth slowly unraveling before my eyes. For 3 years, I had never truly been a part of his life. I was just a hidden room, a place he retreated to when he was tired, a place that required no lighting, no official title, no introductions to the outside world. I had been a recent grad, a normal girl working in the administrative department of Vance Group. I never flaunted my background, never mentioned the things my mother taught me, never told anyone I was fluent in multiple languages. I hid it, all because Michael once said, "I like you because you're simple, gentle, and don't have sharp edges. Women who are too ambitious just exhaust me." Hearing that, I voluntarily folded away all my sharp corners, like turning a crisp piece, of paper into a docile origami crane to place in his palm. I thought that was love. Now I understood. When a woman has to shrink herself to fit a man's ego, that love was a cage from the very beginning. A round of applause snapped me out of my thoughts. The MC stepped onto the stage, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, Sterling Holdings is deeply honored to welcome a special guest, the man who will represent the International Investment Board in our strategic signing. He has spearheaded massive acquisitions across Singapore, Tokyo, and Europe, and is currently the senior advisor for Sterling Holdings. Please welcome Mr. Richard Sterling." The ballroom brightened. A middle-aged man walked out from the wings. He wore a sharp black suit, his temples lightly dusted with silver. His face was composed, his eyes deep and cold as a midnight lake. The moment I saw him, my fingers dug into the edge of the tablecloth. Richard Sterling. I had known that name for a very long time, and not from the Wall Street Journal or the awestruck whispers of the executives around me. I knew him from an old Polaroid my mother kept hidden at the bottom of a cedar trunk. In the photo, she was very young, wearing a vintage white summer dress, standing next to a tall, bright-eyed man with a proud smile. Only after she died did I learn that man was my biological father. For 22 years, he had never existed in my life. My mother, Teresa Wynne, was once a brilliant UN translator. She spoke multiple languages, traveled the world, and had a blindingly bright future. But after marrying Richard Sterling, she gave up her career, followed him to the West Coast, and eventually packed me up and left when I was 3 years old. She never spoke ill of him. She only taught me one thing. "Anna, if a man won't give you a rightful place by his side, never lower yourself to beg for it." When she passed away from cancer, I was 23. I handled the funeral alone, signed the hospital bills alone, stood before her portrait alone, and promised to live a good life. I never went looking for Richard Sterling. I didn't need a father who only existed on a birth certificate and in an old photograph. Yet tonight, he was standing on that stage, not 50 yards away from me, receiving a standing ovation, and I was sitting in a dark corner, having just discovered my fiancé publicly flaunting another woman. Life had a sick sense of humor. After Mr. Sterling's brief speech, the networking session began. The heavy hitters of the business world immediately swarmed the VIP table. Michael stood up, Victoria linking her arm through his, lifting her chin with immense pride, like she was the woman destined to walk beside him into the big leagues. I watched them walk toward Mr. Sterling, and a suffocating, absurd feeling washed over me. My fiancé was leading another woman to kiss up to my biological father. I set my water glass down. The clink against the glass table was soft, but in my head, it echoed like something shattering. I stood up, smoothed down the skirt of my black dress, and walked toward the VIP section. Every step I took was slow, but incredibly firm. I didn't know what I was planning to do. Maybe I just wanted Michael to see me. Maybe I wanted to tear down the curtain he had used to hide me for 3 years. Or maybe, for the first time in my life, I was tired of being the good girl. When I was about 5 steps away, Michael saw me. His eyes locked onto mine and froze. For a split second, sheer panic flashed across his face. Then, very quickly, he looked away. He pretended not to know me. Not a nod, not a word of introduction, not a flicker of recognition. The man who was supposed to marry me next month, who had held me on rainy nights and called me his home, stood under the brilliant chandeliers and chose to treat me like a total stranger. Victoria saw me too. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lips twitching upward. It wasn't a wide smile, but it was enough to tell me she knew exactly who I was. She knew, and she was waiting to see if I would run away in shame or burst into tears like a defeated, pathetic woman. I didn't cry. My mother taught me that tears should only be shed for those who truly love you. Crying in front of people who look down on you makes your tears utterly worthless. I walked right past Michael. I heard him whisper my name, Anna, but it was so weak it was swallowed by the jazz music. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the VIP table where Richard Sterling was holding a cup of espresso, speaking to the presso, CEO of Sterling Holdings. He looked up at me. His eyes wavered for a fraction of a second, as if a buried memory had just brushed against his vision. I bowed my head slightly, smiled, and spoke to him in fluent French, the very first language my mother ever taught. Me? Mr. Sterling, it is a great honor to meet you on such an important evening. I followed your speech and was deeply impressed by your strategic outlook on the Fox Beach, Southeast Asian markets. The entire VIP table fell dead silent. The fake smile on Michael's face froze. Solid. I knew that from this second on, the woman he thought only knew how to cook, keep the porch light on, and live in the shadows was dead. Richard Sterling stared at me for a long time, so long that the executives around the table began exchanging confused glances. There was shock in his eyes, but not the kind of shock you get from hearing a young woman speak French. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost from his past materialize right in front of him. I maintained my polite smile. I didn't bow lower, nor did I act overly familiar. I didn't come here tonight to claim a father. I came to take back the final shred of dignity that Michael had just trampled on. Mr. Sterling set his espresso down and replied in perfect French. You speak beautifully. Where did you learn? I looked him dead in the eye. My mother taught me. His hand jerked. Just a tiny movement, but I saw it. My mother's name hadn't even been spoken, but my face, my voice, the way I stood with my spine perfectly, straight in front of this crowd, it had undoubtedly struck a nerve he had tried to bury for decades. I didn't wait for him to ask more. I turned to the Japanese delegate sitting next to him and switched to flawless Japanese, discussing the potential of West Coast logistics and post-pandemic supply chains. The man's eyes lit up, nodding vigorously as he replied enthusiastically. Then I pivoted to German with a financial consultant, English with the British investors, Mandarin with a tech representative, and Spanish with an infrastructure fund manager. The space around the VIP table grew hushed. The superficial networking chatter died down. The eyes that had previously skimmed over me like I was invisible were now glued to me. I could feel Michael standing behind me, his breathing hitched. In 3 years together, he never knew I could speak multiple languages. He only knew I made him chicken noodle soup when his stomach hurt, knew his exact coffee order, and always turned off the living room lamp when he fell asleep on the couch. He never asked what I studied, what I dreamed of, or what I had sacrificed to become the quiet woman standing behind him. An older investor chuckled. Is this young woman on the Sterling payroll? Because if she is, you guys are hiding your top talent. The CEO of Sterling Holdings looked bewildered. Michael took a half step forward, as if to intervene, but Victoria grabbed his arm, pulling him back. I saw her eyes darken, the smile on her face stiff as cracking paint. In her mind, I was supposed to be the silent victim who slinked out of the gala, nursing a broken heart and vanishing from Michael's life. She never expected me to stand here, stealing the spotlight she so desperately craved. Mr. Sterling slowly stood up. When he stood, the rest of the table fell silent. He looked at me, his voice dropping an octave. "What is your name?" I knew this moment was coming. I thought I would tremble, choke up, or feel self-pity. For 22 years, this man hadn't once asked how I was living. But strangely, I felt incredibly calm. "My name is Anna Nguyen." He repeated it, almost in a whisper. "Anna." The name fell from his lips like something that had been asleep for a very long time. His eyes traced my kleine eyebrows, the bridge of my nose, the curve of my mouth. I knew he was searching for my mother in my face, and I knew he found her. Michael suddenly blurted out, "Anna, what are you doing?" I didn't turn around, but Mr. Sterling's gaze snapped to him, turning freezing. "Cold. You know her, Mr. Vance?" Michael stiffened. It was a simple question, but for him, it was a blade to the throat. If he said yes, he'd have to explain why he pretended not to see me earlier. If he said no, he would personally sever the last tie he had to me. I turned to look at him, offering a featherlight smile. Mr. Vance must be busy, entertaining his guests. He must have mistaken me for someone else. All the color drained from his face. Victoria quickly forced a laugh, stepping in. "There must be a misunderstanding. Miss Anna is so talented. I never heard Michael mention her before." I looked at her. "That's because some people prefer to keep others locked in the blanche dark, so it's easier to walk someone else out into the light during the day." I didn't shout, but the words carried clearly to everyone standing nearby. The air instantly turned to ice. Michael looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me to stop. But why should I? The one who should have stopped was him, 3 years ago, before he started turning my love into a cheap, dirty secret. Mr. Sterling stepped out from behind the table, stopping right in front of me. This time, his voice wasn't that of a ruthless corporate negotiator, but of a father who had lost far too many years. "Your mother's name is Teresa Nguyen, isn't it?" My chest tightened. I didn't answer immediately. The whole room seemed to hold its breath with me. Finally, I gave a brief nod. Mr. Sterling closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was a raw, trembling agony in his gaze. He reached out and took my freezing hand in front of everyone. "Allow me to introduce you," he said to the crowd, his voice loud, clear, and steady. "This is my daughter, Anna Nguyen." The words dropped like a bomb, sucking all the sound out of the ballroom. I heard someone's silver spoon clatter onto a porcelain plate. I heard a woman behind me gasp. I heard my own heart pounding against my ribs. Mr. Sterling's hand was warm, but my soul felt ice cold. 22 years without a father, yet, on the very night I was utterly betrayed, I was suddenly elevated to a position that forced everyone to look up to me. The irony made me want to laugh, but my throat was painfully tight. Michael stood paralyzed just a few feet away. Every ounce of his charismatic CEO persona had evaporated. His eyes were glued to Mr. Sterling's hand holding mine, looking as though a solid gold door had just been slammed in his face. I knew exactly what he was thinking. The port logistics project he had chased for 6 months, the negotiations he had painstakingly prepped for, the relationship with Sterling Holdings he dreamed would skyrocket Vance Group into the Pekstring RE. Fortune, 500, all of it now rested in the hands of the woman he had just pretended not to know. Victoria was the first to regain her composure. She stepped forward, her smile, beautiful but brittle. "Mr. Sterling, it turns out Anna is your daughter. I'm so surprised. If I had known, I would have been much more hospitable to her." Mr. Sterling didn't even look at her. He only looked at me and asked softly, "Are you tired?" A simple question, but it made my eyes sting. For 3 years with Michael, I was always the one asking if he was tired, if he was hungry, if he needed me to wait up for him. It had been so long since anyone had asked me that question, with genuine concern, as if my feelings actually mattered. I gently pulled my hand from his grip. It wasn't a violent motion, but enough to tell him I wasn't ready to accept this delayed fatherly affection. "I'm fine." Those 2 words made his eyes dim. He nodded, not forcing the issue. His silence frustrated me more than any excuse would have. If he had been defensive, I could have fought back with anger. But he just stood there, treading carefully, like a man who knew he had arrived far too late. The CEO of Sterling Holdings immediately had staff bring an extra chair next to Mr. Sterling. It was placed dead center, the exact spot Michael had spent the entire evening trying to proximity schmooze his way into. I sat down, back, straight, hands folded in my lap. The gazes of the entire ballroom pricked at my skin like needles, but I didn't lower my head. I had lowered my head for far too long. Michael finally walked over, his voice incredibly hoarse. Anna, I can explain. This. I looked up at him. Explain it here? In front of Miss Thorne and all these esteemed guests? He paled. Victoria immediately grabbed his hand, forcing a smile. Michael, I don't think Anna is just misunderstanding things. Do you two know each other? That question was venomous. It backed Michael into a corner. If he acknowledged me, Victoria would be humiliated. If he denied me, he'd be digging his own grave. In front of my father. I stared at Michael, waiting for his answer. Just one sentence. For 3 years, I had waited for him to claim me. I waited until my heart calloused over, until the answer tonight didn't even matter anymore. But I still wanted to see exactly how much of a coward he could be. Michael's lips trembled. She's a former employee of my company. In that moment, the entire world went utterly quiet. I thought it would hurt, but it didn't. When someone is already dead in your heart, stabbing them again just kicks up dust. I let out a soft laugh. Former employee. Mr. Sterling turned to Michael. His eyes weren't furious, just dead and cold, freezing Michael in place. Mr. Vance, did you just say my daughter is merely your former employee? Michael panicked, backpedaling. I didn't mean it like that, sir. I stood up, cutting him off. He's right. At his company, I was an employee. At this gala, I am a stranger. And in his life, I suppose I was just someone to be kept in a dark corner. Gentle when he needed me, brushed aside when he didn't. No one dared to breathe. Victoria clenched her fists, her manicured nails, digging into her palms. I looked at her, then at the ring on her hand. Miss Thorne, that's a beautiful ring. Her face changed color. Michael stepped forward in a panic. Anna, please. I didn't let him stop me. What a coincidence. I have the exact same setting. The only difference is, before I came here tonight, Mr. Vance told me to take mine off because he was afraid it would invite complicated questions. Whispers erupted across the room like fire catching dry grass. Victoria flushed, a violent red, while Michael stood frozen as if he had just been slapped across. The face in front of Seattle's elite. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to scream. The truth had stripped off its designer tuxedo and exposed its ugliest, filthiest core all on its own. Mr. Sterling looked at me, his voice low. Do you want to go home? I looked at Michael one last time. The man I once loved stood there, stripped of all his pride. But in my eyes, he wasn't even worthy of pity. He was simply the tuition I paid to learn that love cannot be built on secrets. I'd like to stay for the rest of the gala, I said. I sat back down in the gala, chair next to Mr. Sterling, right in front of Michael and Victoria. Tonight, I wasn't running away. I wasn't the one who needed to feel suffocated anymore. Sitting next to Richard Sterling as the whispers amplified around the room felt like crossing an invisible boundary in my life. On one side was 3 years of bowing my head, hiding my shine to be the obedient woman behind Michael Vance. On the other was blinding light, calculating stares, and a status I never wanted. To lean on yet one that unexpectedly became the ultimate shield protecting my last shred of dignity. Mr. Sterling leaned in and asked quietly, Do you want me to handle this right? Now? I stared at the reflection in my water glass, watching my distorted image in the crystal. No, it's my mess. I'll clean it up myself. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. I knew he wanted to destroy them. For me, but he was experienced enough to know that a wounded person doesn't need someone else to be angry on their behalf. I refused to be the newly discovered heiress hiding behind her daddy's money for revenge. Michael looked down on me because he thought I had nothing. Fine. I would let him watch as I crushed him, on my own merit. The gala resumed, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. The executives who were previously swarming Michael quietly backed away, flocking instead to my side to offer greetings. Some praised my language skills, others asked where I went to college, and some tactfully hinted at partnerships with Sterling. Holdings, I responded with perfectly calibrated smiles, not overly warm, not arrogant. I learned that from my mother. The deeper the pain, the straighter you stand. The more people underestimate you, the less you show them you're bleeding. Michael tried to approach me several times, but every time he took a step forward, Mr. Sterling's gaze swept over him. Without a single word, my father's. Aura stopped him dead in his tracks. Victoria stood by, her radiant burgundy gown failing to hide her utter humiliation. Looking at her, I suddenly felt a twinge of pity. That woman thought she had won simply because she walked in on Michael's arm, but she was nothing more than another pawn in the calculated merger of two wealthy families. Near the end of the night, a Sterling rep announced that the strategic signing ceremony would be postponed to review specific clauses. When Michael heard that, his face collapsed. He knew better than anyone that a delayed signing at a gala like this wasn't an administrative hiccup. It was a death sentence. A door slamming shut. When I finally stood up to leave, Michael threw caution to the wind and chased after me. I had just stepped out onto the hotel plaza, the biting Seattle rain hitting my bare arms when he grabbed my wrist. "Anna, please, let me explain." I stared at his hand gripping my wrist. "Let go. You made your choice. But things between Victoria and me aren't what you think. My family pressured me. The board needs this Thorn real estate merger. I only meant it to be temporary. I just needed to keep you out of the spotlight for a little while." He choked on his words under the hotel's canopy lights. The man I loved had become brutally unrecognizable. I used to lose sleep over a single furrow of his brow. Yet now, seeing him panicked and terrified, my heart was perfectly still. When love truly dies, you stop caring about right and wrong. "I never wanted to leave you," he pleaded. I laughed bitterly. "You just wanted to keep me in the dark while you paraded someone else in the light." "Michael, it's not that you didn't want to leave me. You just didn't want to lose both options." He looked at me, his eyes red. "I love you. That's real. But you being ashamed of me is also real. You being terrified people would find out I was your fiancé is real. You letting another woman wear my ring in front of my face is real. And tonight, when you looked me in the eye and pretended I was a stranger, that was real." I spoke softly, but I knew every word stabbed into places he couldn't defend. He dropped my wrist like it burned him. I opened my clutch and pulled out the small velvet box I had brought from the apartment. The diamond ring inside sparkled, cold and innocent, as if it hadn't borne witness to dozens of broken promises. I placed the box into his palm. "Keep it, Michael. The wedding is off. From now on, we are nothing to each other." He shook his head, his voice cracking. "No. I won't accept this. I'll come find you. I'll talk to your father." "Don't you dare call him my father," I cut him off. "He hasn't even earned that right yet, and you certainly don't have the right to leverage him." Michael stood paralyzed. I turned around and walked down the steps. Through the hotel's glass doors, I could see Victoria watching us, her eyes burning with pure venom. I knew tonight wasn't the end. People like the Thorns didn't just let things go when their bottom line was threatened. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I finally realized the scariest thing in the world wasn't losing a problema. Man, it was losing myself for the sake of a man. A sleek black town car, arranged by Hannah, Richard's assistant, pulled up in front of me. I hesitated for a second before opening the door and sliding in. As the car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Michael was still standing. In the rain, clutching the ring box, looking entirely alone under the drangle. Streetlights. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt like a long, exhausting chapter of my life was finally in the rearview mirror. The car dropped me off at my Capitol Hill apartment near midnight. I stood at my front door, keys in hand, unable to put them in the lock. Michael had leased in this place for me 3 years ago. He said it was close to Vance Group's headquarters, so my commute would be easy. Back then, I was naive enough to think he was taking care of me. Now I knew better. An apartment not in my name. A relationship kept off the record. A ring I wasn't allowed to wear outside. They were all velvet ropes tying me to the shadows without me even realizing it. I opened the door. The faint smell of jasmine diffuser oil lingered, but the Space suddenly felt so suffocatingly foreign. His favorite rocks glass was on the coffee table. His Brooks Brothers jacket from last week was draped over the Raiders sofa. In the fridge was the stew I had made for him. I looked at each item. The pain wasn't sharp anymore, just a dull, heavy ache like a cold stone sitting on my chest. I went into the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and started tossing his things. In. Dress shirts, ties, his shaving kit, his Tom Ford cologne, the business. Books he never finished reading. Every item hitting the cardboard box made a small thud, but in my soul, it sounded like doors locking shut. When I picked up the only framed photo of us, I stopped. In the picture, Michael was smiling warmly, and I was leaning my head on his shoulder, my eyes bright with happiness. I looked at the girl in the photo and felt a wave of pity for her. She had loved with all her heart. She just loved the wrong person. My phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it, then declined the call. He called again. I declined again. On the fifth try, I blocked his number. Immediately, an unknown number called. I knew who it was, but I picked up. Anyway, Michael's raspy voice came through. Anna, don't block me. I'm downstairs. Just let me up. Let's talk. I pulled back the curtains and looked down at the street. His Audi was parked by the curb, the headlights still on. The man sitting in that car was probably realizing for the first time in his life what it felt like to be locked out. We have nothing to talk about. I know I was wrong tonight, but you have to understand my position. I'm caught between my board, this massive project, and the Thorne family's pressure. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed dryly. People who hurt others always love to say they didn't mean to, but the bleeding is still real. He went quiet for a long time, then his voice dropped into a plea. Please don't. Use your connection with Richard Sterling to blow up my project. Vance Group has everything riding on this merger. If we lose the Sterling backing, my company goes under. Are you calling me because you're terrified of losing me, or terrified of losing your deal? The question hung in the air, greeted by dead silence. That pause was all the answer I needed. I closed my eyes. After 3 years, the thing he was most terrified of losing still wasn't me. You just answered the question, I whispered. Anna, no, it's not like that. I'm just panicking right now. Give me one more chance. I'll break off the engagement with Victoria. I'll take you public. I'll marry you tomorrow. I looked at my black dress draped over a chair. The dress that had walked with me through the most humiliating night of my life. Are you marrying me to save your project or to save your reputation? Stop being so vindictive. I'm not. I'm just forcing you to look at the truth. I hung up and blocked that number too. Seconds later, a text came through from another unknown number. It wasn't Michael. It was Victoria Thorne. Listen to me, Anna. Don't think just because Richard Sterling claimed you that you can change the game. Michael belongs to me. If you know what's good for you, you'll back off quietly. I read the text over and over, then burst out laughing. She still thought we were fighting over a man. She didn't understand that the moment Michael turned, his face away at the gala, he ceased to be something I wanted to keep. What I wanted now wasn't to win him back. I wanted them to pay for how they treated people. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. My eyes were a little swollen, but my mind was startlingly clear. I brewed a black coffee, opened my laptop, and drafted my resignation letter to Vance Group HR. The reason was one line: no longer a cultural fit. I hit send, then took off my employee ID lanyard and left it on the kitchen counter. That piece of plastic used to be my pride. Now, it was just a receipt for 3 years of being undervalued. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Hannah, Mr. Sterling's assistant. Miss Anna, Mr. Sterling would like to meet you at 3 p.m. today at the Reserve Cafe in downtown. Time and location can be adjusted to your preference. I stared at the text. Sitting down with a father who had been absent for 22 years wasn't going to be easy, but I knew that if I wanted to sever ties completely with Michael and his world, I needed to walk through a different door. I replied, 3 p.m. works. I arrived at the cafe at 2:50. The place was bustling, but a private booth by the floor-to-ceiling windows had been cleared out. Richard Sterling was sitting there, an untouched black Americano in front of him, a thick manila folder resting neatly by his hand. Today, he wasn't wearing his intimidating corporate suit, just a crisp white button-down and dark slacks. Yet, the aura of a man used to commanding rooms was impossible to hide. When he saw me approach, he immediately stood up. That simple gesture made me pause. I was so used to watching men like Michael make everyone else wait. I wasn't used to seeing a powerful father rise out of respect for the daughter. He missed for 2 decades. You're here. I pulled out a chair and sat, placing my bag beside me. You can just call me Anna. His eyes flashed with a hint of sorrow, but he didn't argue. All right, Anna. What would you like to drink? I can order myself. I signaled a barista and ordered an oat milk latte. When the server walked away, a heavy, suffocating silence fell between us. I looked at his hands resting on the table. Those hands possessed prominent veins, having signed countless massive acquisitions and struck fear into the hearts of negotiators worldwide. But today, sitting across from me, his fingers were trembling slightly. He spoke first. When did your mother pass? I looked out the window. The Seattle rain had stopped, and pale sunlight washed over the wet pavement. Cars drove by as if nothing in the world had changed. 3 years ago, stomach cancer. The color drained from his face. He bowed his head for a long time, his voice raspy. Did she suffer much at the end? I gripped my coffee spoon tight. Why are you asking? Do you want to know exactly which painful moments you missed? He squeezed his eyes shut. My words weren't loud, but I knew they cut deep. I didn't want to be cruel, but there are some truths that, if softened, become an injustice to the people who lived them. The nights my mother couldn't sleep from, the agony, the midnight pharmacy runs, the days I balanced a full-time job with managing her hospital bills. He wasn't there for any of it. A belated inquiry couldn't erase 3 years of terminal illness, let alone 22 years of totale absence. He spoke very quietly. I am sorry. I gave a humorless smile. My mother isn't here to hear it, and I'm far past the age where I need an apology from my father. His lips trembled. A man accustomed to winning was suddenly rendered helpless by the ice in his own daughter's voice. He slid the manila folder across the table, toward me. This is the trust and the assets I set aside for your mother years ago. She refused to take them, and she cut off all contact. I kept them maintained. Now, I want to transfer them to you. I flipped open the cover. Inside were transfer deeds for shares in Sterling Holdings, along with prime real estate deeds in Washington and California. The Capely numbers printed on those pages were large enough to make a normal person dizzy. For a lifetime. I closed the folder and pushed it back to him. I don't want it. Anna, I didn't come here for money. Last night, you claimed me in front of everyone. I appreciate that. It helped me keep my dignity. But if you think money can buy you the title of dad, you're wrong. He looked at me, pure agony in his eyes. I'm not trying to buy you. I just want to return what rightfully belongs to you and your mother. My mother always told me the thing a woman needs most from a man isn't his money, but to be given her rightful place by his side. You didn't give her that. Michael didn't give me that either. You two are from different generations and different tax brackets, but you share one trait. You both think women can be kept in the dark until it's convenient for you to acknowledge them. He froze. That sentence struck him at his absolute core. I saw him lower his head, his shoulders slumping. In that moment, he wasn't Richard Sterling of Sterling Holdings anymore. He was just an old man aging rapidly from regret. A long time passed before he spoke. I won't ask for your forgiveness right now. I don't have the right to force you to accept me. But if there is anything you want to do, I will stand behind you. I looked at him. For the first time since sitting down, my resolve wavered. Not because of the money or the status, but because I suddenly realized that if I wanted to completely cut out Michael and the people who looked down on me, I needed a position powerful enough that they could never trample on me again. I pulled the folder back toward me but didn't open it. I won't call you Dad, just for these papers. But I want something else. He looked up quickly. Name it. I want a seat at the table for the contract review between Sterling Holdings and Vance Group. As your lead linguistics advisor and international risk analyst. Surprise flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by deep admiration. You want to face Michael yourself? No, I replied smoothly. I want him to understand that the woman he kept in, the dark isn't devoid of light. I was just stupid enough to dim my own shine for his sake. He stared at me for a long time, then nodded. Done. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Sterling Tower, floor 26. I'll put you right across the table from him. I stood up and grabbed my bag. Before walking away, I heard him call out softly, Anna. I paused, but didn't turn around. Thank you for coming. I didn't answer. But as I walked out of the cafe, I knew the door opening in. A friend of me no longer belonged to the past. It was the door leading to a battlefield Michael Vance could never have prepared for. The next morning, I wore a tailored cream pantsuit, my hair pulled into a sleek, low bun, and minimal makeup. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back wasn't the girl in the plain black dress, cowering in the plain corner of a ballroom. Nor was she the girl who stayed up until 2 a.m. reheating soup. My eyes were a little swollen from lack of sleep, but my posture was rigid, my gaze dead calm. I grabbed the briefing binders I had spent all night studying and left the apartment at 7:30. When the town car dropped me off at Sterling Tower, I looked up at the towering glass monolith reflecting the gray Seattle sky. This was the door Michael was desperate to walk through. Today, I was walking through it before him. Hannah was waiting in the lobby. She was in her 30s, sharp-featured, but with a very polite tone. Miss Anna, Mr. Sterling is in the boardroom. The Vance Group dossier are at your seat. Thank you, Hannah. The elevator shot up to the 26th floor. The red digital numbers ticked upward, yet my heart rate remained perfectly steady. I wasn't here to play the role of the scorned ex-girlfriend. I was here to work, and to show Michael that a woman he undervalued could, once she stood up, ensure he had absolutely nowhere to run. The boardroom was massive, boasting panoramic views of Elliott Bay. Mr. Sterling sat at the head of the table. Seeing me enter, he simply gave a brief nod. He didn't act overly familiar or try to play the doting father in front of his staff. I appreciated that professionalism. It made it easier to breathe. I sat to his right, opened my files, and reviewed my final notes. At 9 sharp, the double doors opened. Michael walked in, accompanied by his CFO and 2 corporate lawyers. He wore a dark suit, his face noticeably more gaunt than it had been 2 nights ago. When he saw me sitting in the lead advisory chair on the Sterling side of the table, his footsteps physically faltered. Anna. I looked up, my voice entirely monotone. Good morning, Mr. Vance. I will be participating in today's contract review as Sterling's international risk and compliance consultant. I expect we'll keep things professional. The entire Vance Group delegation went dead silent. His CFO cast a nervous glance at me, likely trying to compute how their former admin assistant was now sitting in the seat of power, dictating the terms of their survival. Michael pulled out his chair and sat, trying to mask his panic. Of course. If this is business, I trust you'll be impartial. I smiled. I don't mix personal feelings with financials, Mr. Vance. The numbers are ruthless enough on their own. Mr. Sterling shot me a quick glance, a faint, proud smile barely registering in his eyes. The meeting began. The Vance Group presented their West Coast logistics hub expansion, pitching a $300 million investment. They wanted Sterling to underwrite the international capital and open doors to Singaporean investors. Michael spoke smoothly. Every slide was flawless, every metric polished to the point where any layman would think this was the deal of a lifetime. But I had spent 3 years reading Vance Group's annual reports. I knew their cash flow was stretched as tight as a violin string. I also knew their 2 subsidiaries were cross-collateralizing properties to secure overlapping loans. None of that was on Michael's beautiful slides. When he finished his presentation, I put my pen down. I have 3 questions. Michael looked at me, his jaw clenching. Go ahead. First, in the prospectus you submitted, short-term liabilities are listed at $120 million. But according to the credit addendums we cross-referenced last night, your required payouts over the next 2 quarters exceed $180 million. How? Do you plan to explain that $60 million discrepancy? The air in the room grew heavy. The Vance CFO turned an ugly shade of gray. Michael paused for a few seconds. It doesn't impact the project's liquidity. I flipped to the next page. Question 2. If it doesn't impact liquidity, why? Did Vance Group use the developmental rights to your existing Portland warehouses to secure an additional line of mezzanine debt just last month? Michael's face drained of blood. He stared at me like I was an alien. It seemed that only in this exact second did he realize I knew more than just how to make his coffee. I had lived with him for 3 years. I listened to his late-night rants about the company, noted the loopholes he thought no one saw, and taught myself how to piece together the mosaic of his corporate fraud. I spoke slowly. Question 3. Sterling Holdings requires a transparent partner. Vance Group is looking for a life raft. Mr. Vance, are you here to form a joint venture or to offload your toxic risk onto our balance sheet? Michael stood up abruptly, his hands slamming on the table. Anna, do you really have to push it this far? I looked up at him, my voice whisper soft. Mr. Vance, there is no ex-fiancé in this room. There is only an auditor verifying whether your company deserves Sterling's money. Mr. Sterling tapped his finger on the mahogany table. We'll take a 10-minute recess. When we resume, Vance Group will provide answers with hard data, not emotions. Michael stood there, his eyes bloodshot with rage and impotence. I looked down and closed my binder. I felt incredibly peaceful. This was only the beginning. During the break, the Vance team shuffled out of the room, looking like they were walking to their execution. Michael trailed behind, but as he passed my chair, he stopped. I didn't look up, busying myself with highlighting a few lines in the report. Right as the boardroom doors clicked shut, he spun around, leaning down so only I could hear. Are you absolutely determined to back me into a corner? I put my highlighter down. You're mistaken. I'm not backing you into a corner. I'm just turning the lights on the numbers you tried to hide. For 3 years, I wasn't terrible to you. I looked him dead in the eye. That sentence was so absurd I didn't even want to laugh. Not terrible? You rented me an apartment, ate a few rushed dinners with me, promised to eventually take me public after we got married. And you think that makes you a saint? He clenched his fists, looking pained. I had my reasons. My family needs the Thorn merger. My company needs this project. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I used to understand. I understood it so well I erased my own existence to make your life easier. But Michael, did you ever stop to understand how I felt? Sitting in the corner of that gala, watching my fiancé hold another woman's hand? He fell silent. His silence always came precisely when he had completely run out of excuses. I stood up, picked up my water glass, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the city. Below, the traffic looked like tiny streaks of light. Everyone down there had a place to go. I was the only one who had foolishly believed my home was inside this man's heart. Michael stepped up behind me. Anna, if I break off the engagement with Victoria, if I issue a public apology to you, will you give me one more chance? I turned around. No. He looked like he'd been physically struck. You answer that fast? Because I waited 3 years for you to ask that question. If you had asked me a month ago, I probably would have cried and said yes. But now, the answer is one word. Just then, the boardroom doors flew open. Victoria Thorne marched in, wearing a sleek white designer suit. Behind her was a regal, icy-looking older woman, Eleanor Thorne, Victoria's mother, the mastermind behind the Thorne family's real estate monopoly. Eleanor looked me up and down, a razor-thin smile on her face. Miss Anna Nguyen, I presume? I'd like a private word with you. Michael frowned. Eleanor, this is a Sterling Holdings boardroom. She ignored him, keeping her eyes locked on me. I'll only be a minute. It's wonderful that young people have talent. But using a newly discovered daddy to sabotage other people's business deals? That's quite tacky. I set my glass down. Mrs. Thorne, if Vance Group's financials were clean, my questions wouldn't sabotage a thing. But if a few basic audit questions make the whole house of cards shake, the one sabotaging the deal isn't me. It's the people hiding the rot. Victoria bit her lip, her eyes red with fury. You talk a big game, but don't forget, without Richard Sterling backing you, you're a nobody. I looked at her, my voice slow and deliberate. At least I never had to wear someone else's ring to prove I had value. Victoria went chalk white. Eleanor's face darkened, but before she could speak, Richard Sterling walked into the room. The entire space fell deathly silent. He looked at Eleanor, his voice completely level. Eleanor, this is Sterling Holdings, not your living room. If you want to, discuss contracts, sit down. If you want to teach my daughter how to behave, get out. My daughter. Those two words made my heart skip a beat. I still hadn't called him Dad, but for the first time it didn't grate on my ears. Because in that moment, he wasn't using the title to force me to accept him. He was using it to stand between me and a threat. The meeting resumed in an atmosphere tense enough to snap. I fired off point after point, every hidden liability, every cross-collateralization, every red flag in their cash flow. Michael grew paler by the minute. Finally, Mr. Sterling closed his leather portfolio. Sterling Holdings is suspending all partnership proceedings with Vance Group, pending an independent forensic audit. The words dropped like an executioner's axe. Michael sat paralyzed. Victoria glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I knew that from this moment on, the real war had begun. After Mr. Sterling declared the suspension, the boardroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the HVAC vents. Michael sat across from me, his hands resting on the table, knuckles bone white. He was no longer the arrogant CEO from the gala. He was a man watching his empire crumble, realizing that the one pushing him off the cliff was the woman he had kept locked in a drawer. Mr. Sterling stood up. That concludes today's session. Sterling expects the audit report within 7 days. The Vance CFO scrambled to pack his briefcase, looking physically ill. Victoria shot to her feet, staring at my father in disbelief. Richard, are you seriously going to war with the Thorne family over her? Mr. Sterling turned back, his tone icy. Victoria, in business, I look at numbers and integrity. If you think Sterling backed out because of Anna, it means you still don't understand the catastrophe Vance Group is hiding. Victoria was speechless. Eleanor grabbed her daughter's arm, but before leaving, she gave me a long, penetrating look. It wasn't disdain anymore. It was a warning. I understood perfectly well that a woman like her wouldn't accept defeat in a boardroom. When family money is threatened, old money plays dirty to regain control. I gathered my files. As I walked toward the door, Michael called out, Anna, I need to talk to you in private. I stopped. Do we have anything private left to discuss? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you really want me to lose everything? You know Vance Group isn't just me. Hundreds of employees and their families are relying on this merger. I stared at him. That sounded so sickeningly familiar. When a man wants to protect his own selfish interests, he always uses innocent people as a human shield. Before, he said he hid me to protect me. Now, he was saving the company for the employees. The only truth he refused to admit was his own boundless greed. I didn't put Vance Group in jeopardy, Michael. The debts you hid, the assets you double mortgaged, the numbers you cooked, that is what's destroying your Bala company. He ground his teeth. You've changed. No, I replied softly. I just went back to being myself. You're the one who changed. From the man I loved into a man I don't even recognize. His eyes watered. For a second, I thought he might finally apologize, but Michael was still Michael. He clenched his jaw, asking in a mix of pain and anger, did you hide your identity from the start just to test me? I laughed out loud. So even now, he needed to be the victim. He couldn't accept his own betrayal, so he clung to the delusion that I deceived him first. Michael, if I wanted to test you, I wouldn't have wasted 3 years of my Wandhurst youth waiting in the dark. I truly wanted to marry you. It's a shame you weren't worthy of it. I walked past him and out the door. As soon as I hit the hallway, my phone buzzed. An unknown number had texted me, Miss Nguyen, a smart person knows when to leave an exit open. Don't think Richard Sterling's backing gives you immunity. The Thorne family is not something you want to mess with. I stared at the screen. I didn't panic. Instead, a cold wave washed down my spine, making me hyper-focused. Before, my biggest fear was being abandoned. Now, I realize that once you no longer need anyone's protection, you lose half your fears. Hannah walked up beside me. Miss Anna, Mr. Sterling asked you to join him in His office. I followed her to the corner suite. My father was standing by the glass, looking out over the Seattle skyline. Hearing me enter, he turned. The Thorns won't take this lying down. I know them. Are you scared? I stayed quiet for a moment, then answered honestly. Yes. But I'm not scared of to them. I'm scared I'll get soft. He looked at me for a long time, his gaze softening. If you want to step back, I'll handle the rest. I shook my head. No. If I back down now, I'll spend the rest of my life feeling like that same woman they forced to stay quiet. I want to walk this road. Myself. He nodded, then slid a different manila folder across his desk. Then you need to know this. The luxury development, the Thorns, are betting their entire liquidity on the Bellevue waterfront project has massive zoning and environmental litigation pending. I wasn't going to touch it, but if they want to drag you into a war, we can't just play defense. I opened the folder. Shell companies, zoning violations, leveraged bank loans, and dummy corporations leaped off the page. The more I read, the more I understood why Eleanor was so confident. I also understood that if this vulnerability was exposed, the entire Thorn empire would crumble. I looked up. Are you giving me this so I can get revenge? He spoke slowly. No, I'm giving you a choice. Getting hit and not hitting back isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's just choosing to let yourself get hurt twice. That night, when I arrived back at my apartment, I found a bouquet of white roses and a blank envelope sitting on my welcome mat. Inside the envelope was a printed photo of Michael and me from years ago. On the back, written in thick, bleeding red marker, was a message. Take what isn't yours, and you'll lose what matters most. I stood in the empty hallway holding the photo. For the first time, I felt the sheer weight of a war that had escalated far beyond a broken engagement. They didn't just want me to stay quiet. They wanted me to disappear from the plost chessboard. I looked at the red ink. The handwriting was aggressive, pressing so hard the red ink. Ink bled through the photo paper. Lose what matters most. I used to think my self-respect was the only thing I had left to lose. The person who sent this clearly disagreed. They wanted me terrified. They wanted me to hesitate before digging deeper into the Thorn family's secrets. I took photos of the flowers, the envelope, the picture, and the message, then called Hannah. She picked up on the first ring. Miss Anna, is everything all right? I just found a threat left at my door. I think Eleanor or Victoria is trying to send a message. Her tone instantly shifted to tactical urgency. Lock your door, do not touch. The items again to preserve fingerprints. I'm notifying Mr. Sterling and sending a security detail immediately. I looked through the peephole down the quiet, dimly lit hallway. I wasn't easily frightened, but a sudden chill made the hair on my arms stand up. 20 minutes. Later, Sterling's private security team arrived. They checked the building's private security team, cameras, bagged the evidence, and strongly suggested I relocate to a secure penthouse immediately. I was about to refuse, but when they showed me that the hallway camera feed had been jammed exactly 17 minutes before the flowers appeared, I shut my mouth. This was an amateur hour. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Tower early. My father was waiting in his office. On his desk was a copy of the red ink photo and a preliminary security report. He looked me up and down, checking to make sure I was unhurt. Did you sleep at all? 2 hours. He pursed his lips, his eyes dark with fury. I'm going to end them. I dropped my bag on the chair. No. If you step in directly, the narrative becomes a billionaire crushing a rival out of nepotism. I want to do this the clean way. He stared at me. What do you want to do? I opened the Bellevue waterfront dossier, pointing to the shell company that acquired the land rights. I want to audit the capitalization of this LLC. If my Nodder 26 owed, I guess is right, this isn't just a zoning issue. They're using this shell to funnel cash to cover defaults on older loans. He raised an eyebrow. You read that deep into it? I was up until 3 a.m. A 6-month-old company acquiring an $80 million land parcel with only $2 million in registered capital? Unless a massive guarantor is quietly pumping cash into it, it's impossible. For the first time, I saw undeniable, raw pride in his eyes. But he didn't praise me. He simply slid another document toward me. This is a banking subpoena our legal team just dug up. Look at it. I opened it. My blood ran cold. The guarantor for the $80 million loan wasn't Eleanor Thorne, nor was it Victoria. It was Victor Thorne, Victoria's older brother. He rarely appeared in the media, acting as the family's shadow operator. In this file, his signature was on the most radioactive documents. If this project went belly up, the Thornes wouldn't just lose money. Victor would face federal wire fraud charges. Right then, my phone rang. It was Michael. I went to reject it, but my father signaled for me to answer. I put it on speaker. Michael's voice was frantic. Anna, did you get something at your door last night? I looked at Mr. Sterling. How do you know about that? Dead silence on the line. Victoria lost her mind. I heard her screaming at her brother on the phone. She told him that if you keep digging, she wants you run out of Seattle. Anna, listen to me. Do not mess with Victor Thorne, I've told. He's not like Victoria. He plays dirty. I laughed coldly. Are you calling to warn me or begging me not to drag you down with them? I actually care about you. Anna, it's too late for me, but please. Michael, your concern is 3 years too late. I tightened my grip on the phone. His warning gave me exactly what I needed to know. Victoria was just the temper tantrum. Victor was the actual loaded gun. Good. Let's see just how dirty he plays. I hung up. Mr. Sterling looked at me, his voice gravelly. You can stop right now. I don't want you in danger. I looked out the window. If I stop, they think I'm scared. If I'm scared, they'll keep pushing. And if I stay quiet now, the 3 years of humiliation I took from Michael means absolutely nothing. He didn't argue anymore. He pressed the intercom, ordering Hannah to convene an emergency legal strategy meeting. I sat down and opened Victor Thorne's files. The war wasn't about the woman who stole my fiancé anymore. I was walking into the snake pit. The legal meeting lasted 4 hours. Documents wallpapered the conference. Table cash flows, transfer deeds, Victor Thorne's cross guarantees. It was like peeling back the infected bandages of a wound that had been rotting for years. They hadn't just engaged in shady accounting. They had built a labyrinth of debt, offloaded risk to smaller partners, and used the Thorne legacy as an impenetrable shield. Hannah placed a summary brief in front of me. Miss Anna, if we leak this to the SEC and the banks right now, the Thornes will be investigated immediately. But they will retaliate viciously. I looked at Victor Thorne's signature at the bottom of the page. One signature that could demolish an entire high society facade. Mr. Sterling asked, What's your call? I didn't answer right away. I remembered Victoria in her burgundy dress, looking at me like dirt on her shoe. I remembered the red marker on the photo. If I stayed silent, they'd think intimidation worked. If I struck, my quiet life was over. Send the dossiers to the SEC, the FBI white-collar division, and their lead underwriting banks, I said, looking up. But do not leak it to the press. I want them destroyed by federal evidence, not a media circus. Mr. Sterling's eyes deepened. Giving them a dignified exit? No. I just refused to become a monster like them. He was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. It was the first time he looked at me not just as a daughter to be protected, but as an equal to be respected. That afternoon, the files were sent. A few hours later, my phone blew up. Michael was first. Anna, did you really send the files? News travels fast. Victor is losing his mind. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then you should thank me for making sure federal agents find out exactly what he's capable of. Michael's voice dropped. I'm in the lobby of Sterling Tower. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I don't want to. Anna, I'm begging you. If the Thornes go down, Vance Group gets dragged with them. My engagement to Victoria is off, but our cross-collateralized debts are locked in. You hit them, you hit my company. I closed my eyes. So the financial incest was worse than I thought. Michael used to say his love for me was real, yet he chained himself to the Thornes with money, debt, and ambition. Now he wanted my mercy, conveniently forgetting he's had zero mercy when I was drowning in humiliation. Michael, you chose that bed. Don't ask me to tuck you in. I hung up. Seconds later, another call. Victoria Thorne. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was shaking with rage. Anna, are you trying to kill my family? I just forwarded the truth to the people who needed to see it. You think you're so pure. If Richard Sterling wasn't holding your hand, I'd still be a pathetic admin assistant Michael threw away. I looked out the window. The Seattle sky was darkening with heavy rain clouds. Victoria, you're wrong. I was abandoned when I thought he was my whole world. But now? If he got on his knees and begged, I wouldn't take him back. You're the one fighting over scraps. She let out a manic, tearful laugh. You'll regret this. I regretted loving the wrong man. But exposing Victor's fraud? I'll never regret that. Just then, a deep, raspy male voice took over the line. Miss Nguyen, you like playing in the deep end, don't you? My breath hitched. It wasn't Victoria. The voice was unnervingly calm, making my scalp prickle. Victor Thorne. He chuckled softly. You're smarter than I thought, but smart people usually end up dead because they think they control the board. I gripped the phone. Is that a threat? Just a reminder. Seattle isn't as big as you think. A girl who lives alone, commutes alone. Accidents happen. My hand went ice cold. Just then, the office door opened. Mr. Sterling walked in, took one look at my face, and knew immediately. I put the phone on speaker. Pull the files back, Victor's voice echoed in the room. I'll pretend this never happened. If you don't, you're not the only one who's going to bleed. Mr. Sterling crossed the room in 3 strides, snatched the phone from the Perrienen desk, and spoke with a voice so lethally cold I shivered. Victor Thorne, if you so much as look at my daughter, I will ensure the Thorne family is systematically erased from the Pacific Northwest. The line went dead quiet. Then, a click. I stood frozen, my heart hammering. My father looked at me, his knuckles white. Around the phone. You are not going back to your apartment tonight. I wanted to say I was fine, but looking into his eyes, the words died in my throat. Maybe, for the first time in years, I didn't need to pretend to be invincible. I nodded. Okay. That night, I was transported to a Sterling corporate safehouse in a black SUV. But as the car exited the underground parking garage, a matte black motorcycle, without license plates, swerved out of a blind spot, cutting us off. A deafening crash shattered the silence. A heavy steel pipe smashed through my passenger window. Glass exploded inward. Something sharp ripped across my forearm, leaving a trail of burning heat. The driver slammed on the brakes. The bodyguard in the passenger seat drew his weapon and bailed out, but the motorcycle was already tearing off into the rainy Seattle night. I looked down at my arm. Blood was pouring down to my wrist, thick, hot drops, splattering onto the SUV's gray leather seats. The driver whipped around, pale, as a ghost. The bodyguard was shouting into his radio. I sat perfectly still. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the pain at first. When you are pushed over the absolute edge, the first emotion isn't terror. It's a freezing, hollow void. I stared at the shards of safety, glass on my lap, then thought of the drawn of my mother. If she were alive, she'd be scolding. Me for being stubborn while her hands shook bandaging my arm. The bodyguard's phone rang. He listened for a second, then handed it to me. It's Mr. Sterling. I pressed it to my ear. Where are you hurt? His voice wasn't calm. I could hear his jagged breathing, like he was sprinting. My arm. It's not deep. Do not lie to me, Anna. Which hospital are they taking you to? I looked out the shattered window at the blurring city lights. I'm fine. Anna Nguyen. He barked my full name, his voice cracking. I froze. In 20-something years, almost no one had ever spoken my name with that mixture of pure rage and sheer terror. Listen to me. You can refuse to call me Dad. You can blame me for the rest of your life, but you do not get to say you are fine when you are bleeding. I lost your mother. I am not losing you. My throat closed up. I turned my head away so the driver wouldn't see my eyes, welling up with tears. Since I was little, I was used to enduring. When my mom was sick, I endured. When my boyfriend hid me, I endured. When I was betrayed, I endured and stood back up on my own. But that sentence acted like a physical hand, reaching in and touching the softest, most locked-away part of my soul. The SUV roared into the emergency bay at Harborview Medical Center. By the time, I was wheeled into a trauma bay and a doctor was disinfecting the gash, Richard. Sterling burst through the doors. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the barkin. collar, hair wind-blown, a stark contrast to his usual immaculate self. Seeing my blood-soaked sleeve, his face turned thunderous. "Does it hurt?" I wanted to say no, but under that agonizing, fatherly gaze, I couldn't lie. Yes. His hands clenched into fists, so tight his knuckles popped. The doctor said the cut was long and needed 8 stitches, but thankfully missed the tendons. As the needle pierced my skin, I bit my lip hard. My father stood right beside the bed, not saying a word, but every time I flinched, his eyes held more pain than mine. Once I was stitched up and moved to a private recovery room, Hannah walked in, placing an iPad in front of him. "Mr. Sterling, traffic cams track the motorcycle. The plates are fake, but the rider was spotted dumping the bike near a private security firm's warehouse, a firm that receives retainers from an LLC owned by Victor Thorne." Mr. Sterling looked at the screen, his voice absolute ice. "Forward it all to the FBI and the Seattle Police Department, and notify the banking syndicate that Sterling Holdings is immediately divesting from all credit facilities tied to the Thorne family." I looked up. "If you do that, the Thornes will collapse overnight." He looked at me. "Then let them collapse. Bad business can be audited later, but anyone who dares to touch my daughter has no room left to negotiate." I stayed quiet. The phrase "my daughter" didn't chafe anymore. Maybe because my arm was throbbing, or maybe because on this bloody night I was simply too exhausted to pretend I didn't need anyone. The door suddenly swung open. Michael rushed in, out of breath, looking pale and frantic. The moment he saw my heavily bandaged arm, his eyes went bloodshot. "Anna! Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he would actually do it. I swear I didn't know." Mr. Sterling immediately stepped between the bed and Michael. "You have the audacity to show your face here?" Michael looked at me, trembling. "I warned you, but I should have done more. I should have stopped Victoria. I should have stopped Victor." "This is your fault," I said, staring at him. If this were the old me, seeing him this panicked would have broken my heart. But the fever dream of our relationship had completely broken. "Michael, you don't need to apologize anymore. The moment you chose to align with the Thornes, you chose their consequences." He shook his head wildly. "I'll testify. I'll tell the feds everything I heard. From Victoria and Victor. I'll give them the cross-collateral paperwork. I just ask one thing, please, Anna. Don't disappear from my life." I closed my eyes, suddenly overwhelmingly tired. "Testify because it's the right thing to do, Michael. Do it for whatever shred of humanity you have left." He stood there, tears slipping down his face, but my heart remained entirely unmoved. Just then, Hannah's phone rang. She answered, then looked at Mr. Sterling. Seattle PD just arrested the motorcyclist. He confessed to being hired to send a message to Miss Anna. The wire transfer came from Victor Thorne's personal fixer. The FBI is moving in on Victor now. The room fell dead, silent. I looked out the hospital window. The Seattle night was still dark, but a thin ribbon of light was beginning to slash across the colored horizon over the Cascade Mountains. I knew this dawn wouldn't bring peace, but after the blood spilled tonight, I also knew there was no going back. The next morning, the pain in my arm was a dull, throbbing ache. Every time I moved, my skin pulled tight, but the physical pain only made my mind sharper. I sat up in the hospital bed watching the morning financial news on the mounted TV. The ticker tape scrolling at the bottom of the screen silenced the room. Breaking. Thorne Real Estate Bellevue project halted amidst federal probe. Banks. Freeze assets. In just one night, the Thorne family, synonymous with high society galas, luxury, high-rises, and glossy magazine covers, was dragged down to earth by words like fraud, wire investigation, RICO, and shell companies. Hannah walked in and set a warm cup of tea on my tray. Miss Anna, Victor Thorne, is in federal custody. He hasn't confessed to ordering the hit yet, but the money trail is irrefutable. Mr. Sterling has our legal team fully cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I held the tea, my palms cold. And Eleanor? Frantically trying to leverage politicians to save her son, but the banks have cut off their liquidity. The Bellevue project is effectively dead. I set the cup down. The Puget Sound outside my window looked so blue, so utterly disconnected from the ugly collapse of human empires. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened, and Michael walked in. He had changed clothes, but his face looked gaunt, like he hadn't slept a wink. Seeing me sitting up, a mix of relief and profound sorrow washed over him. "I just came from the U.S. Attorney's office," he said quietly. I didn't reply. Mr. Sterling, who had been sitting on the sofa near the window, slowly set his coffee down. "What did you tell them?" Michael looked at my father, then at me. Everything I knew. Victoria's calls with Victor. The times Victor leveraged the Vance Group loans to force me into compliance, and how the Thorns used the engagement to trap my company. I stared at him. If this were the past, I would have ached seeing him so defeated. Now, I only saw a man who had finally been backed into a corner by his own blinding ambition. "Did you do it to clear your conscience? Or to try and save Vance Group?" He lowered his head. After a long pause, he answered, "Both. I'm not noble. Enough to say it was purely out of guilt. But Anna, last night, when I saw you, bleeding, I realized that if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't even have the right to call myself a man anymore." I looked back out the window. The morning sun hit the white bandages on my arm, blindingly bright. "You should have realized that the night you stood at the gala and pretended I was a stranger." He choked back a sob. I could hear his breathing shudder, but before he could say anything, a female detective walked into the room with Hannah, needing my signature on the final victim impact statement. I recounted the threats, the phone call, the motorcycle attack. My voice was calm, but when I signed the paper, my fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the realization that I was officially locked into a war of attrition. By the afternoon, the news cycle had exploded. Major commercial banks publicly announced audits of Thorn real estate. Investors fled. Minority shareholders demanded emergency board meetings. On social media, photos of Victoria clinging to Michael at the gala were dug up, accompanied by brutal rumors of fake engagements, corporate bailouts, and criminal conspiracies. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to read it. Public schadenfreude might feel good for a fleeting second, but I refused to let my trauma become tabloid. Entertainment. That night, Victoria Thorn came to the hospital. She wasn't wearing a designer gown. She wore a simple trench coat, her hair tied in a messy knot, her eyes swollen and red. She didn't have her mother or a security detail behind her. She stood in the doorway, looking at me with a toxic mix of hatred and terror. "Anna, you won." I looked at her. "I never played a game to win or lose with you." She let out a bitter, tearful laugh. "Stop acting so high and mighty. If you hadn't shown up, Michael would have married me, and my family wouldn't be facing federal indictments." Her voice was desperate, but the desperation was so completely selfish. "Victoria, the one who broke your engagement wasn't me. It was Michael, because he never truly loved you. And the person who destroyed your family wasn't me either. It was your brother committing fraud. You're so used to blaming the rest of the world that you'll spend your whole life blind to your own sins." She lunged forward as if to strike me, but Michael, who had been lingering in the hallway, grabbed her arm and yanked her back. She whipped around to look at him, tears spilling over. "You're still defending her?" Michael dropped her arm, his voice exhausted. "Victoria, it's over. Stop making it worse." She stood frozen, then she broke down, sobbing hysterically, a sound like shattering glass. I didn't pity her. Some tears aren't shed out of remorse. They're just shed because you're out of moves. When hospital security escorted her out, the room fell silent again. Mr. Sterling walked over and pulled the blanket up to my shoulders, a gesture so clumsy it was almost endearing. I looked at him and softly said, "Thank you." He froze. Just 2 words, but his eyes instantly went red. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, there's still a lot to handle." I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I didn't feel entirely alone. 3 days later, I was discharged. The doctor instructed me to keep the arm dry and avoid heavy lifting. My father had me moved into a high-security luxury condo overlooking Elliott Bay, far from my old Capitol Hill apartment. I stood in the vast, unfamiliar living room, looking out at the gray waters of the Sound, feeling hollow. In less than a week, I had lost a looming marriage, lost my job, lost the place I called home, and suddenly gained a billionaire. Father and a war I didn't start. Life changes so violently fast that sometimes you don't even have time to hurt. You just stand still, watching your old reality collapse like a demolished building. That afternoon, Hannah handed me a briefing folder. Miss Anna, Vance Group just announced a major executive reshuffle. Michael Vance has stepped down as CEO, pending an internal audit. I traced my finger over the printed words. I used to think that when this day came, I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt a quiet, weightless detachment, like watching a dead leaf fall from a branch. It used to be green, it used to be beautiful, it used to be part of the tree, but once it falls, it can never be reattached. What's the status of the Thorne family? I asked. Their board ousted Eleanor. Victor has been denied bail. The banks are liquidating their assets. The Bellevue project is dead in the water. Hannah paused. And Victoria. I hear she left Seattle this morning, moving to the East Coast to avoid the media. I didn't say anything. Victoria thought a big diamond and a red dress made her a winner. In the end, she was just a casualty of her own arrogance and her family's greed. I didn't forgive her, but I didn't want to spend another second of my life thinking about her. That evening, Michael came to find me. He didn't have the new address, so he had waited in the lobby of Sterling Tower until Hannah passed me a handwritten note. It just said, I want to see you one last time. I held the note for a long time before finally taking the elevator down to the courtyard. He was standing under the ambient garden lights, looking incredibly thin. His suit hung loosely on his frame, a dark shadow of stubble on his jaw. When he saw me, he stood up straight out of habit, his eyes immediately dropping. Toe my bandaged arm. Does it still hurt? Yes. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I've said it a million times, but I'm not asking you to come back. He looked down, his voice raspy. I just wanted to. I tell you I've canceled all the wedding vendors. The merger with Thorne is dead, and Vance Group is being taken over by a restructuring firm. I'm leaving Seattle for a while. The cold breeze rustled the pine trees. I looked at the man in front of me. For 3 years, I dreamed of a public proposal, a wedding, a small house filled with laughter. Yet now that he had lost everything else, I had zero desire to walk toward him. Why are you telling me this? So you know I actually lost everything. Not just the project, not just the CEO. Title. I lost you. He smiled, a broken, empty smile. I used to think you would. Always just be there. No matter how busy I was, how much I hid you, how long I made you wait, I thought you'd always be there. You were wrong. I looked at him, my heart perfectly still. Michael, I was there. You just never bothered to turn around and look. He choked, a tear slipping down his face and hitting the stone pavement. If there is a next life. Don't talk about a next life, I interrupted. You couldn't even treat the person next to you right in this one. Don't make promises about lifetimes you haven't earned. He stood paralyzed. After a long moment, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the velvet ring box. He didn't offer it to me. He just opened it, looked at the diamond one last time, and snapped it shut. I'm going to keep this, not to wait for you, but to remind myself of the incredible woman I threw away. I didn't reply. Some words sound incredibly sincere when spoken too late, but there is nowhere left to put them. They're like flowers left on the porch of a house that's already burned down beautiful, but they don't fix a damn thing. When Michael turned and walked away, I didn't call after him. I watched his shadow stretch out under the street lamps until he disappeared completely. In that moment, I knew the 3-year chapter of my life was permanently closed. No resentment, no waiting, no hoping he'd turn back, just me standing in the wind, with a healing wound and a wide-open future. I turned back to the building and saw Richard Sterling standing a few yards away. He had likely been waiting for a while, giving me space. He just looked at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't deflect. "I'm okay, Dad." He froze. Just one word, but it stopped the billionaire tycoon dead in his tracks. I froze too, but I didn't correct myself. There are some distances that I can't be bridged in a single night, but there are some doors that swing open the moment you accidentally call out the right word. After the night Michael left, I thought I would suffer from insomnia. Instead, I slept incredibly deep, asleep with no dreams, no echoes of a man's voice, no memory of him turning away from me at a gala. When I woke up, the morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the condo in warm gold. My arm still hurt, but it was a tangible, clean pain. It was infinitely better than the silent, festering wounds I had pretended not to feel for 3 years. A month later, Victor Thorne was officially indicted on federal racketeering and wire fraud charges. The hitman, the fixer, and several bank insiders flipped on him. The Thorne family name went from gracing charity galas to dominating true crime podcasts and financial scandal blogs. The Bellevue Project was seized. Eleanor Thorne retreated from public life entirely. Vance Group was gutted and restructured. Michael divested the majority of his shares to cover the penalty clauses. The last I heard of him was through an old coworker. She said he moved down to Portland and opened a small, independent coffee shop. He named it Behind the Lights. Hearing that name, I just sat in silence for a while. I guess he finally understood. Some people are the light of your life, and you only realize it once. You're left entirely in the dark. But belated epiphanies don't build time machines. I accepted a position as the Director of International Strategy for Sterling Holdings. But I didn't change my last name to Sterling, and I didn't move into my father's Mercer Island estate. I was still Anne and Wynne, my mother's daughter, before I was anyone else's. My father didn't push. Every weekend, he came over to my condo for dinner. At first, the meals were incredibly awkward. He didn't know how to act around me in a casual setting, and I still struggled to figure out our dynamic. Once, he accidentally knocked over a bowl of soy sauce and looked as panicked as a child, caught misbehaving. I looked at him and burst out laughing. He laughed too, his eyes crinkling, shining with unshed tears. From that day on, the ice between us quietly melted away. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I took him to the cemetery, standing before her headstone. The man who made Wall Street executives tremble quietly dropped to his knees. He didn't sob loudly. He just bowed his head, his broad shoulders shaking. "Teresa, I'm sorry. I was too late." I stood beside him, holding a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. I didn't condemn him on her behalf, nor did I forgive him on her behalf. I just realized that sometimes it takes a man his entire life to learn how to love someone properly, and by the time he figures it out, the person is no longer there to receive it. On the drive back, he looked at me. "Do you hate me, Anna?" I watched the Seattle skyline pass by the window. I used to, but eventually, I realized that holding on to hate is just another way of keeping yourself chained to the past. Mom is gone. I have to keep living. He went quiet for a long time, then whispered, "Thank you." I didn't reply, just leaned my head against the glass. The word dad didn't catch in my throat anymore. It wasn't entirely familiar yet, but it wasn't a stranger's title anymore, either. A year later, I stood on the main stage of the Global Economic Summit in Santa Monica, Francisco, representing Sterling Holdings. I delivered my keynote address, flawlessly, transitioning between 3 languages. In the front row, Richard Sterling sat looking at me, his eyes beaming with absolute pride. I was no longer the girl clutching a nameless invitation outside a hotel in the rain. I was no longer the secret fiancé hidden in the shadows, waiting for validation from a man who didn't deserve me. I was Anne and Wynne. I had loved wrong, I had hurt, I had been erased, but I walked out of the darkness on my own. 2 feet. After my speech, my phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. "I hope you found your peace." I looked at the text. I knew it was Michael. I didn't reply. Not because I was still angry, but because when a door is already sealed shut, you don't need to check the lock. I deleted the text, put my phone away, and stepped out onto the convention center balcony. The Pacific breeze whipped through my hair, salty and violently. Free. In the distance, the sun was breaking through the fog over the Golden Gate Bridge, brilliant and blazing, like the promise of a brand new day.